Hello everyone, this is going to be a no BS guide to how to make your Oculus Quest as good as a Valve Index with virtual desktop getting to 120 Hz or FPS. And I will, just a little context or a little background, I have a Valve Index and I tried it for a month. I didn't like it. And the reason for that is because my computer just wasn't strong enough to run the graphics better than my Quest 2 does through virtual desktop, as in I was getting better graphics and frame rate using Quest 2 versus Valve Index at a better resolution with the Quest 2. So I scrapped the Index. I'm using it for work. I'm not using it for my personal play. And so this is going to be a guide to get you quickly to how I have my setup. Just know that it may not be the most optimal, but I have tweaked many settings for several months, and this is what works for me. It may not work for everyone. So getting to the pros, the cost. A Valve Index is rather costly, particularly these days since it's kind of high in demand. The Quest 2 can cost less, but you will need some purchases. There's no wire. I hated the Valve Index because there was a wire. Even when I hung it from the ceiling, I hate knowing that I'm confined by a wire. That's just me because I've been playing with the Quest for several months, of course. There's a lower level of computer hardware needed for the Quest 2. So what I mean by that is, even with my laptop, which is a beastly gaming laptop, $3,000, I was not able to get a better performance out of the Valve Index versus the Quest 2 with virtual desktop. That's just me. If you have a much better computer and it's a desktop, you might be in a better situation, but this is just me once again. No sensitive base stations. You don't have to hang any external cameras to your wall. I have these holes drilled into my wall that I'm too lazy to dry patch now. Cons. Now the cons with this Quest 2 is you need to monopolize the 5 GHz Wi-Fi at your home, and that's going to be a deal breaker for most of you. So what that means is your loved ones cannot get onto your 5 GHz Wi-Fi, at least when you're playing, and probably even when you're not playing, because you don't even want those devices to touch that 5 GHz Wi-Fi network. So this may be a deal breaker for many people who have a family that craves that 5 GHz Wi-Fi, just like you do. So the other con is you need a Wi-Fi 6 router. We'll talk a little bit about that in next few slides. And another con is that the Quest 2 runs hot when you're pushing it to 120 frames per second. I've seen horror pictures on Reddit where someone's, something has melted in the Quest because it was running so hot. I haven't had any issues with that yet. That being said, whenever I play Pop 1 running at this frame rate, I have a actual fan pointed at me while I'm playing because it gets hot. My head gets really hot while wearing this. So that is something to consider. With the Valve Index, I was definitely more comfortable playing for hours versus when I'm running physically hot temperature on this device when I'm playing. Okay, I burn out maybe in 2 to 3 hours of play on the Quest 2 at this frame rate. I'm drinking a lot of water. The Index I went for like 4 hours, 5 hours, and I felt pretty comfortable, to be honest. So now the other con with the Quest 2 is you have to play it in the same room or in visual distance of the router, and so you would think that with the 5 GHz Wi-Fi you can go pretty far, and you've heard some people say, oh yeah, I can go through walls and all that. You really do want to be playing in the same room, and a general rule of thumb is if you can see the router from where you're playing, you're in pretty good shape. But I play in the same room or in the next room, which is technically not very far because I play in like an office sometimes, or my router's in an office. And so I play in the living room sometimes just for more space, and I can visually see my router, and that's good enough. So population 1 specific benefits. When playing on the Index, yes, it is smoother. I don't drop frames as much as I do on the Quest. Like the frame rate stays pretty consistent at the 120, but it's just my computer just really wasn't strong enough to run the Valve Index, and you'll see my computer specs, and my computer specs down here are actually pretty pretty nice. Granted, it is a laptop. If it was a desktop, it probably would have been more stable. But unfortunately, I'm not able to play at a good enough resolution with 120 frames per second or hertz on the Valve Index that I like, a resolution that I like. And I'm not able to record or stream without substantial lag and super like dropping of frames. So it just wasn't functional for me. But with the Quest 2, I'm able to do all that: stream, record, play at the frame rate I want, at the clarity I want, and you'll be able to see that later, I hope. I'm not sure if the recording's going to work out perfectly. Now, one thing I also hated about the Valve Index is the pressure-sensitive grip. If you're not aware and you don't have an Index, it's pressure-sensitive, and you can adjust the pressure so that if you touch it, it'll like barely tap the grip. It's not even a grip, it's just like a handle. If you grip this flat handle, then it'll count as a grip. The problem with that is if you put it on low threshold, then you have to essentially always play with your hands open unless you're going to grip something. So you're playing with your hands open, and that's really awkward for me. Now you can push up the threshold, the sensitivity, so that you have to squeeze harder. But then again, if you're squeezing hard on this sensor, eventually it's going to wear out, right? So I just didn't like the pressure sensitivity, and some people will like that. I just didn't. I'm used to the Quest, so biased, of course. I like the button on the Quest, and I can hold it, and it feels relatively natural. I'm used to it. So another thing that I don't have on here is that the tracking is more sensitive, and that's a good and a bad. I guess I do have it here, but I put it as a bad thing because I had bugs with the sensitivity. So let me just go over that first. What I had issues with is that I like playing with snap turn. I know people are going to make fun of me for playing with snap turn. Hey, I'm a top player. I play with snap turn. So be it. I love snap turn. So what happened was when I was aiming, I was getting this jitter. Like my crosshairs would move around, and my arm's not moving. I'm even holding my arm still. And the only way to fix it was to grip the weapon in the game with two hands and then let go, and then the jitter went away. It's some weird Valve Index bug. And the only way to fix it was to either grip the weapon with two hands and let go, or just play with smooth turn. Once I switched it to smooth turn, I never saw the issue again. And so that's something that was really bugged the heck out of me. But smooth turn's okay, and I was playing with it just fine. But I prefer snap turn because I'm a lazy bastard. But whatever. Another thing about the tracking is that when you're aiming, the tracking is more sensitive, which is a nice thing. When you think, oh hey, better tracking, but it actually means you have to really stabilize your arm really well when you're aiming those precise Sako shots, and so that is a little harder actually. I noticed that I really had to tense up my arm a lot more. My arm was getting a lot more tired because I'd have to really tense it up to hold that aim really precise and steady. Whereas the Quest honestly felt easier to aim with. Just subjective, purely subjective. I'm used to the Quest, but just my 2 cents. Now, I would like to say this is maybe my bias as well, but the computer requirements I felt were much steeper for the Valve Index. I was running at only like 100% resolution, and I have a really nice laptop. Most people do not have the laptop I have. I would say that 90% of people don't have the laptop I have, or even the computer if you match the desktop settings to what I have. But it's a laptop, mind you. But when I play on the Quest 2 with Virtual Desktop, I can run at higher graphics, crisper, higher graphics, higher refresh rate, because it's just Virtual Desktop, I believe, is such a beautiful app. It somehow packages or compresses the data so it's not as hard a stress on my computer. However, it's a harder stress on your Wi-Fi. So, it's harder stress on your Wi-Fi, less strain on your computer versus the Valve Index. And I should mention before we skip over AirLink. People say, oh, some people do better with AirLink versus Virtual Desktop. I'm a scientist and I'm a technical support. I tried AirLink so many times just recently, just like last week when I was just got back to the Quest 2, and I tried so many different resolutions, different settings, and it doesn't allow a lot of customization, mind you, but I was not able to get a good refresh rate and graphics resolution and it be stable. It was jittering, dropping frames all the time when I'm running at like not anywhere close to what I was able to get on virtual desktop. And I tried all the settings, and I had people who are much more familiar with Airlink help me, who are really good technical support people as well. It just didn't work for me. Maybe it's working better for you, but my theory, and I have no way to confirm this because it's just me who found this out, is that the Airlink requires a harder strain on your computer, but less strain on your Wi-Fi. So what I mean by that is this virtual desktop, we're going to spend a lot of time on your Wi-Fi, your router, and you need to do that to make it run well because it is really high pressure on your router, your Wi-Fi. But the Airlink, I believe, and this is just theory, is that it really doesn't require all those, Wi-Fi. It does require Wi-Fi 6 and all that, but it's less technical because I feel it's less strain on your Wi-Fi, but more strain on your computer. And that's just subjective. I have I have no technical reason for that. But my friend, who is that really good person who with tech, who loves Airlink and uses it, he was trying to help me get it set up. We tried everything. He has a 3080 Ti NVIDIA graphics card and like a newer processor than I do, and he's running it perfectly on Airlink, is what he's saying, at 120 frame rate, running smooth, good maxed resolution, and he's having no problem. I took off everything off my Wi-Fi and tried to get good graphics as I could in frame rate, and I couldn't. So the limiting factor for me is my computer. So mind you, Airlink is probably possible if you have a beastly computer, but it didn't work for me. Just straight out, it didn't work for me. So if you want to copy my setup, go for it. Many of these variables are going to vary depending on your what you choose, and it's a very complex thing to get this going. So what do you need to buy if you're going to copy my setup? Well, you need a Wi-Fi 6 router. My router was actually pretty expensive. This is just what works for me. I bought and returned a few routers. I'm not going to name the routers because maybe it was just a defective one. Routers are like motherboards. When they can arrive, when you get them out of the box, it could be dead on arrival. So I'm not going to name the other routers, but I believe the creator of Virtual Desktop recommends an Asus router, or at least it was a long time ago. It was like a year ago now, maybe. That was cheaper than this one. It was like the lower model of this one I have. So you can probably get a router for cheaper. Just Google cheaper options, and you can even use that Google kind of text I have here. There's a lot of people who make videos on this, even on what router that you can get away with. But just know that when you're considering the router, you need one obviously that has a 5 gigahertz channel. That's obvious. But you'll want one that can manage multiple devices well. And we don't have to get into technicals for that. That's not this kind of video. But the reason for that is if you have a lot of people in your house that have a lot of devices, you're definitely going to want a nice expensive router that can handle all those devices, if that makes sense. But for me, I only have one other adult here, like I said. Yes, we have several devices, but this is 7-8 devices, but this is working for me. You need to buy Virtual Desktop, $20. You need Windows 10, not 11, and that is huge because for whatever reason, people are complaining right now because Windows 11 is new that Virtual Desktop is just not working well with Windows 11. I haven't tried it. I don't want to try it. That's just word on the street. Maybe by the time you watch this video, it'll be fixed. But right now, even when I bought a new computer for my laboratory, I made sure it was Windows 10. I'm not taking that chance. I was happy with Windows 7. Hey, Windows Vista back in the day. Anyways, sole access connection to your 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. You could not have anyone else touching that 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. Even when I'm playing in like a tournament, Pop 1, I tell my wife, take off your phone, take off the TV. You can't watch TV. You have to go on your mobile data to watch whatever you want to watch because no one's touching this router right now, and that's just me. I want everything to be crisp and perfect. Now, of course, you need a gaming PC with at least my specs. If you're going to copy what I do, you're for sure probably going to be able to get away with less than what I got, right? But just know that this is working for me, and this is at the graphics I like. I'm pretty picky with my graphics, so you will need at least to copy, if you want to copy what I got, an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2070 Super with Super Q, in short. For a laptop that's really, really, really dang good, So that's going to be hard to get in a laptop. Just get a desktop. It's just my answer. I needed a laptop for work. Processor, that's a slightly outdated processor at this point, but it's still a good processor. So note that even with this computer specs, I was not maxing out a Valve Index. Okay, so that is something you have to consider. Everyone thinks, oh, you get the Valve Index, you're going to win. Well, you need things to really take advantage of that Valve Index. Okay, I'm able to capitalize on the Quest 2, and I prefer it, is what I'm telling you. So these are the steps you are going to need to get my setup. Okay, I tried to make this as simple as possible, and I'm going to go through this as simple as possible, because each of these steps, to be honest with you, or some of these steps, can take whole YouTube videos that you'll see other content creators do, and I would even recommend going to those if you are confused on some of these steps. But we'll go through each of these 9 steps. First, you will need to download the Virtual Desktop Streamer app onto your PC. You see the website above. It's very quick. It only takes a second. Install it. It will install on your computer. I always have it running in the background and turned on when I open my computer, and it'll be in the bottom right, your like a minimized tray. It'll be there as soon as you turn on your computer if you allow it to do that. So then you'll have to download and install Virtual Desktop app on your headset. Of course, that costs approximately $20. Might change. There are sales, but let's get on to step 3. So step 3, and this is a pretty easy one, is you have to make sure that your computer is on high performance mode at least. Some videos, content creators recommend ultimate performance, and that may be what's affecting me. That might be what's hindering me from doing some of these high-end things, like running the Valve Index at higher settings and all that. However, since I have a laptop, mind you, and if you have a desktop, you might not have this issue. Since I have a laptop, it was overheating. Okay, it was straight overheating. My whole computer shuts down, freezes and shuts down, and the thing is burning hot when I touch it, right? So I found for me that high performance works, and I even toned down my processor to 95% or something like that. It's been a while. I think even 98%, just to try and not overheat my laptop so it doesn't shut down. Okay, so if you have a desktop, you might be able to turn on ultimate performance, and I would recommend doing so if you don't have any problems like I have with overheating. So now ultimate performance may not show up. You might have to actually enable that setting. So Google how to do that if you don't see it when you open it up. But to get to this setting, you type in the power and sleep into your computer search bar, and you open the additional power settings that you see on the top right in this image, and then you'll get to this menu. Step 4, your NVIDIA settings. Now, it's been a while since I saw whatever YouTube video I saw to get the settings to where I needed to get them. From my memory, the most important one here was the power management mode. You need to make sure that you're in the preferred maximum performance, but obviously you need to make sure that your graphics processor is selected here, and that's what that text is at the top. That was what Virtual Desktop recommended you do. But I would just recommend copying my settings. I'm not saying that these are the best settings in the world to have. I don't think anyone's clear on that, or even if this really translates into game correctly through Virtual Desktop. But just know that I don't break it. I don't change anything if it ain't broken. So this is working for me. Copy my settings if you like. So now the router. Step 5. We're getting to the router. This is probably what's going to take you the longest to do, because if you go out, buy a new router, set it up, it's a pain in the ass to get everything working right. Using some of the apps, you got to plug in, log in, create channels, test the channels. You might have to recreate the channels several times, and everyone in your household is going to be mad at you. So this is probably, I'm going over this quickly, but no, this is probably the most painstaking part. If you happen to get, I got an Asus router because I told you I bought and returned several routers. I like their app. They have like a mobile app that you can do on your phone to set up, and it's just easier for me, and I got used to it, so I like it. I'm happy with this router. I'm not saying it's the best. There's definitely other options out there, but when you get your router set up, you need to create 2 channels. You need to create a 5 GHz channel only for the Quest, and you need to create a 2.4 GHz channel for all the peasants in your household, everyone else, and all the other devices, right? So going through these settings, you have the 5 GHz band. You have your network name. Now, when you go to the wireless mode here, you have to choose AX only, and that is the Wi-Fi 6 channel. And you have to make sure the 2.4 gigahertz does not have this selected. So you have to make sure this is selected here. Enable this, and that's it says here the 80. Just enable that. All this I didn't mess with, I believe. The channel bandwidth, I maxed that sucker out. And then the control channel, I put it to the highest channel. I'm not an expert at this, but essentially what this means is I put the 5 gigahertz band at the highest channel, which I saw no other devices anywhere near. Usually devices are near the lower channels, like the 20s, 40s, 60s. So I kept the 2.4 gigahertz channel there and all those devices there, and I put the 5 gigahertz channel at the high end so that it doesn't get affected by those other devices. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not that kind of nerd. So you can just copy everything else here. I don't think any of this other stuff I messed with, but the other thing I should note that if you have this smart connect like I do, where it'll switch between 2.4 and 5 gigahertz just automatically based upon whatever's better. Like if you walk too far away, obviously you want that off because you want the Quest 2 just on the 5 gigahertz. So now just looking at the 2.4 gigahertz setup here, just so you have it. I know I mentioned it already. Just make sure that it's not on the Wi-Fi 6, okay? Just note that. Otherwise, you don't have to mess with too much here. Step 6, you have to plug in your Ethernet cable from your router to your computer. And that sounds simple, but there's a couple things to take into account. You need an appropriate cable, a high-speed cable. If you don't know if you have a newer cable, it's likely that it's fast enough. But just note that I circled here, the second thing, I circled here on this image that you can't really make it out, but that this router specifically has a strong computer chip in it. And it's got that port, that green one there that's circled in red, and they even indicate that that's the fast port, the fastest one they have. So I put that Ethernet cable to the fastest port there to my PC. So that cable, the black cable that's coming out, I know it's not the easiest to see, goes directly to my computer, my desktop, or my laptop, sorry. So, step 7, virtual desktop PC settings. Now we get to the settings part. So once you get past all this, the next step is to open the desktop streaming app on your PC, and then it's really easy at this point. You just make sure your Oculus username, where you got all that red line, matches your Oculus username. Okay, and it has to match, letter for letter, pretty much. I don't think capitalizations matter. For the virtual, then you go to the options page, and this is where you can start getting to the good stuff. I would just say copy my settings. That would be the easiest thing. People debate the codecs, and that's probably the most important part here. But I would say just keep it what you see here. That's what the general consensus is, I believe. And just make sure everything else matches here. Now, the only other thing to consider here that may or may not work for you, this is one thing that people debate, and the creator of Virtual Desktop said keep it checked, is the automatically adjusted bitrate option. The creator of Virtual Desktop even commented on someone's YouTube video and said for most people, if you have this checked, it'll work better. It did not work better for me. It put me at too low a bitrate. It put me at like 40 bitrate or something like that, where I'm at 150 Mbps now. Or I can't remember. Whatever it put me at, it was way lower, and I'm able to push it higher, and it worked for me. So just note that it may or may not work for you. Try it with both. Okay. In step 8 here, we're getting to the good stuff, the Quest VD settings, where you have to connect your Quest to the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. You put on your Quest and do that. That's obvious. And then you're going to match the settings in these next images. So now, the most important things here. Okay, you have your streaming settings on. This is where you're going to be spending most of your time playing with these settings. Fortunately, you can do it in the headset by double-clicking on when you're in the Virtual Desktop app. So you go in your Quest, you open the Virtual Desktop app, you double-click the left Oculus control button, and you're going to open up this menu here. And you're going to be able to go to these settings. Go to the streaming. I enabled the 120 FPS right there, as you can see. And this streaming is the actual streaming, like what you see in your headset, right? I like
all these settings the way they are. I don't want to touch anything because they're perfect for me right now. I'm living the dream. So starting with the graphics quality, if you have a lower graphics card than me, you're going to match, and they even recommend, right, different settings based upon your graphics card. Play around with it. Honestly, this doesn't make that much of a visual difference, a little bit, but I could put it on low and I probably would get a little more stable frame rate at 120, but I'm happy with the medium. I'm not complaining. Everything's working fine. It doesn't affect my gameplay all that much by changing the medium to low, so I'm happy. The VR frame rate, this is where you can play with 2. I like 120 FPS because I can maximize this. And what I mean by that is if you're not able to play at a fast enough speed and react at a fast enough speed to be able to capitalize on this kind of frame rate, this fast frame rate, then you're probably better off just going with like a 90, 80, 72. Okay, so what I mean by that, and it's going to be a lot less strain on your system. What I mean by that is I need to make a whole video on this. The whole point of upping these 120, this frame rate right here is to get a better peeker's advantage. See the enemy before they see you. And it also helps me with aim because when things are smoother for me, I aim better. I'll do a whole video on peeker's advantage. That's not for now. It's too long. But I aim better, and I see the enemy before they see me. I certainly noticed this when I was playing Quest 2 native, playing people who were using Valve indexes. It's very obvious when they see you before you see them when you play long enough. So looking at the VR bitrate, okay, it says it right here, increasing this will increase the image quality, but it's going to increase the latency. And latency is your enemy kind of when you're balancing all this out. More strain on your Wi-Fi too, right? I would, people recommend like the 40 range to the 72 Mbps, but it just wasn't turning out crystal clear for me. Yeah, it worked, but it wasn't like crisp image. And I didn't like that. It was kind of pixely, so I just bumped this sucker out. Like I said, I make sure I'm the only one on this Wi-Fi. I have a pretty good internet connection through my ISP. I have about 220 Mbps down, so 150 ain't capitalizing the 220 ain't so bad. I have about 60 to 70 for everybody else in the house on the 2.4, so this is working for me. You're going to have to play with this. This is probably the thing you're going to be adjusting the most. You're going to be adjusting this. Hopefully under the frame rate, you're probably going to want to stay at 90 to 120 if you're really taking advantage of this setup. And then you can play with these two, these few things, but this is really where you're going to change stuff. The sharpening for me, this worked out good for me. Play with this as you like. Now we'll get to some of the other stuff. The slice encoding. Gamma, making things brighter or darker is going to help save your battery. I forgot to mention one of the biggest cons, and I probably should have just changed this before I remade the video, but we're in too deep. Running a higher frame rate, higher graphics period, particularly the frame rate, because it's the most taxing, is going to stress your battery. You are going to drain, if you're not running an external battery pack of some kind, you are going to run out of battery in like 30 minutes. Okay, I'm not even joking. It drains your battery. 90 FPS is probably a better balance of performance versus battery use, so just know that, okay? How I have it is I have a Bobo VR Mark II head strap that has a battery pack, interchangeable battery pack that's like magnetic, and I have like 2 batteries, so I just rotate in. And even then, if I play for like 8 hours, I'll eventually run out of battery. At 120 FPS, even with external battery packs, it's draining faster than it can charge, okay? So just know that it is high battery demand. But I prefer performance, quality over quantity for me. Okay, so slice encoding, I couldn't remember what this does that it helps with, but you gotta have this checked. That's just what all the other content creators have. Just keep that on there. I don't mess with video buffering or any of this other stuff here. Color vibrance, try it on or off. I don't think it messes with your performance too much, but it does change what things look like. Just see what you prefer. That's an optional one for you. Now here's probably the other most important thing you need to know on this side is show performance overlay. Okay, you're gonna have to click this to test this out, which we're gonna do very shortly. Click this to get the in-game overlay when you're in the game, so you can see how well things are running. Okay, and get the stats, the statistics, and we'll go over that in the next thing. But this is where you check it on and off in this menu. Now this is the settings for your recordings, like how you when you record the video is my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong. But so if I record a video, this is kind of the output of what it's going to be. Copy my settings here. Just go for it and copy it. I'll leave it here for a second. Note that, once again, maybe I'm not running the most optimal things here. Maybe I'm not understanding this screen correctly. I have played with all these settings. Just note that I'm very happy with how I'm going right now. I've got no complaints. So we're going now the fun part, and you can see my Quest 2 here. I'll probably just do a whole video on my elaborate Quest 2 setup. Like, everything has changed here. There's so many accessories. Honestly, at this point, it's probably just as expensive as a Valve Index, just the headset, not the base stations and all that. But just know that this is my setup. You'll note I have the external battery pack. You can see that battery pack there. This is the most comfortable headstrap I've had. I snap that battery pack on and off in a second if I need to, I know it's running low. But we're going to get into the good stuff, looking at what the overlay will look like and when you know you need to change things, essentially. Alright, everyone. So I actually recorded in-game footage with the Quest. Unfortunately, recording wouldn't, through the Quest or through Virtual Desktop using Streamlabs, did not record this in-game performance overlay, which provides real-time data. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over these numbers that I screenshotted from my just my gameplay or just being in the shooting range. And so we'll go over these numbers, but this is the most important thing you have to do after you get everything set up. This is where you're going to find out, by turning on that in-game overlay, whether or not you need to make changes to your setup, to your bitrate, etc. You need to lower your visual quality to change performance and improve the performance. So let's start with the top left number, which is the frame rate. So that obviously is what we're looking at most importantly, right? Am I holding a stable frame rate? So I chose 120, and you're not able to see the data change in real time because I just took a screenshot. But when I was in the shooting range here, for example, actually it dropped as low as the 95s. So it was kind of up and down, so it really wasn't stable. Now, that's not a good thing. Ideally, you want it stable so that things don't feel jumpy when you're in it. The good news is that the human eye honestly has difficulty really detecting differences above 90 or 72 even, honestly, frames per second. So when it drops from 120 to 98, 95, I'm not really concerned. But it drops for me like that because I had my video editing software open and all these other browser windows and all that kind of stuff open. So video editing software, if you don't know, takes a large amount of processing, etc. And memory. So I actually hover between 120 to like 110 frames per second, as it can drop like 10 frames if I'm in a heated battle. Okay, so you're gonna know, obviously visually, as soon as you get in game, whether or not your settings are good, because if everything's really choppy, it doesn't look smooth, then clearly we're having issues, right? And you might see this frame rate drop up and down. You might not be at 120, you might be way lower. We know we got to change things. Okay, so frame rate is the first thing you look at. Okay, and you're going to know when these things are changing, and particularly in a bad way, because they're going to turn orange in real time. So 118 frame rate, if you choose 120 and you're hovering there most of the time, it's not really fluctuating much. I stick with 120. But honestly, I might even benefit from just changing it to 90 frames per second and just keeping it there because it's consistent. So when I'm in a heated battle and the graphics do stutter slightly, it doesn't affect me because I'm a very picky person, like with these kind of specs. Like I feel like differences and changes when I'm performing at a high level. So I might even benefit from just putting it to 90 and keeping it at 90 frames per second. That would also reduce the battery strain. But like I said, everything's working for me. I'm happy. I don't want to mess with anything. The second most important variable here is the latency, the 22 milliseconds. If you are, the general rule of thumb, general consensus among most people who do this is that if you're below 30 milliseconds, you're good. You're solid. Once you get above that, I think it even turns orange, particularly in the 40s it turns orange. I can't remember precisely where. I've had a good setup for quite some time now. And when I say I have a good setup, I really mean the latency, because latency here translates to your in-game lag, right? That's what it is, latency. We don't want this to be high. Otherwise, we lose the benefit of having this nice frame rate and graphics, okay? So you have to be generally under 30 milliseconds. And I'll explain what that means. So the latency, that number right there, that 22, is essentially the sum, all the latency put together. And you have 4 other individual pieces of latency here. You have the game, encoding, networking, and decoding. Those, and then some other number, just the latency from the general connection or whatever, adds up to 22, because that doesn't add up to 22 there, right? So each of these components tells us something. The only 2 things that you can generally tweak if you copy my setup is really the game latency. Right now it's really low for me, which is awesome, 3 milliseconds, and the networking latency. Awesome, 3 milliseconds. That's fantastic. The other 2, you really can't change much. We already chose the best settings, essentially. At least I believe we did, from much research into other content creators and all how to set this up perfectly. So if you get numbers like I got for latency, you're doing fantastic. Realistically, though, what happened to me the first many times I did this is that I had networking at 10, 15, 20 milliseconds sometimes, and it just wasn't playable. Everything was jittery. I tried turning the graphics all the way down, and it wasn't working. And so what did I have to do? Well, the biggest problem for me is that I tried doing it without the fancy router. Because some people say, oh, you can get away without the nice router. I had just the standard router that my ISP gave me, internet service provider. But it just didn't work for me. So my network was like 20 milliseconds right there alone. And so that just wasn't doable. I went out, got the router. Look at me. I'm at 3 milliseconds, right? And I'm optimized it. So it takes a lot of work to get here. Know that. But if you copy exactly what I do in this way, you might not have to do anything, which is nice. This took me months to figure out, honestly, because everyone's settings are going to be individual, as in they're going to vary for you depending on your setup, your internet and your computer setup. So the game latency, that is related to, I believe, how well, how strong your computer is. If that's too high, down your graphics, down the visual quality, all that good stuff. The environment, right? Just drop it. Drop the frame rate. Ideally, you want to be at 90, but if you have to be at 70, drop it to 72. It's still having the no cord and having a 72 frame rate is still pretty dang good. And with these increased graphics you might be at, because you can bump up your resolution real nice. So, really you want to be at 90 frames per second. Forget I said any of that. Stick at 90 frames per second. And so, if your game network latency is high, drop your graphics, okay, period. So you're going to have to play with your settings and your bit rate and all that kind of stuff until you get to the point where everything's stable, especially while you're playing a game. Unfortunately, you're just going to have to play a few games. So when you're in the battle, you're going to realize that when everything was fine in the lobby, but when you get into heat of battle and you're in planes, which has a lot of graphical crap, especially far away, then things are going to slow down and stutter. And things might get ugly sometimes, like visually. It might be pixelated. So you're just going to have to play games and play with these settings till you get somewhere you like. Like I said, I'm happy with where I'm at. I don't want to touch a dang thing. So with that being said, this will just take some time and practice to get at what you need. Higher bit rate, and that's the last variable we're really going to go over here. That is going to lead to increased visual quality. I don't know if you can really see how crisp this image is here, because it just took one little image, but it's so clean. So look how closely you can see that floor detail. Look at that floor detail, right? When I'm playing on this, I had better visual quality than I had on the Index, because for whatever reason, Virtual Desktop does a good job packaging the data, as opposed to just raw data, I guess. Don't ask me, I'm not a tech, but if I can't show you in a recording, even if I record my gameplay, because I'm not able to show you a recorded video at 120 frames per second, but you just have to trust me on it. It's smooth as butter when I'm in a dang game. Smooth as butter at 120 frames per second, or anything around that. 90 is super smooth too. So once again, these are how I got my settings. It might not work for everyone, but it's working for me. I'm able to compete at the highest level, even playing tourneys. And, I'm loving the setup. So copy my settings if you don't want to go through a headache and several, you don't have the time to commit to try and get these settings perfect to you. But otherwise, thank you for watching this video.